All right, so we are already over 50 participants, and I see it's still counting, so people are still joining us. But I suggest we get started. So first of all, thank you so much to everyone taking a bit of time out of your day today to join us at this webinar, where we will be launching this new report that was developed jointly with WWF and IDH. Called Attracting Private Investments for Sustainable Landscapes. So we're very excited to share that with you today, and also to have a couple of great guests with us to share about their experiences. So first of all, I would just like to quickly show you our agenda for today. So we'll start with a few opening remarks from Nienke Stam. Nienke is the Landscape Finance Program Director at IDH, and also opening remarks from Charlotte de Flore, who is the Project Manager of the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development at WWF. Then I will tell you a little bit more about this new report, about this guide that we developed, what you can find in it. But then I think we'll get to the more interesting part, which is hearing from our panelists today. So we're joined by 4 panelists. We have with us Chi, who is the Regional Director Asia at IDH, Stuart Beefus, who is Dutch Fund for Climate and Development Regional Lead for Asia at WWF. We have Richard Gabois, who is the CFO and co-founder of Cinch Markets, and we have Arif Habib, who is the Director of PT Indo Bamboo. And then we'll end also with an opportunity for our audience today to ask some questions in the chat and post some of those to our panel as well. Please note that this session will be recorded. We plan to share it afterwards, also that people that couldn't join us today, unfortunately, would still be able to rewatch afterwards. So on that note, I would like to give the floor first to Nienke for a few opening remarks, and then followed by Charlotte.
Thanks a lot, Thomas, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're glad you all joined. Welcome, and thank you for making time for this webinar. Today we launched the toolkit, as Thomas said, on attracting private investment for sustainable landscapes. IDH and the WWF teamed up on this toolkit, and it worked out to become quite a solid piece of work. It's a solid toolkit, which we hope your colleagues and you can work with to lay solid foundations for more bankable projects. More investment in nature-based solutions, sustainable landscapes, and sustainable land management is needed. And I think people on the call today will be more than aware of this already. Demand for agricultural commodities worldwide continues to put pressure on converting natural vegetation into productive land. And at the same time, climate change and unsustainable agricultural practices negatively affect the amount of land suitable for agriculture and forestry. But with all these new impact investment funds that have been and are being established to address these challenges, there still is a shortage of investable projects. So why is that? Now, okay, often the criteria of these investment funds can be challenging to meet. They have high ticket sizes, they often invest in international currency, they have quite stringent ESG criteria that can be hurdles. And of course, investors look for what they refer to as a balanced risk-return rate, where innovative projects can often be seen as too risky. But for scaling up banking on nature, there's more at play, because landscape finance and investment in nature-based solutions often requires new types of collaboration, new partnerships. So how can we, as NGOs, public-private partnership organizations, work to attract more financial resources to the priority regions for conservation and land restoration, and also make sure that these investment funds create inclusive opportunity? This is where often green investors and NGOs have a shared interest in landscape finance, but often struggle to work together. Within IDH, we started this journey some years ago. Today, we have colleagues in 16 landscapes around the globe that work on attracting sustainable investors and working with companies on sustainable land management innovations to scale up impact. We work on enabling finance for example, smallholder oil palm replanting, for coffee and cocoa growers to transition to regenerative agriculture. For example, we work on developing investment proposals for cocoa agroforestry in Liberia, in Cote d'Ivoire, sustainable cultivars and traceability in Brazil, and investment for a range of projects in Indonesia, Vietnam, including scoping of investment in a buffer zone management company. And my colleague Chi, Regional Director Asia Landscapes, is also on the line today, and she will be telling you more about this later on. In addition, IDH manages the technical assistance facilities of a number of investment funds, including the Ant Green Fund, Agri3 Fund, and the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund. To date, our TA facilities combined have already successfully supported 4 project partners pre-investment to become investable, resulting in a capital mobilized of around 40 million. And in addition, there are 9 pre-investment partnerships ongoing and 7 partners being worked with post-investment to strengthen their capacities. Cinch Markets, also on the line today, is a Land Degradation Neutrality Fund TA facility partner, and they will be sharing some of their experiences. Well, all these experiences of the colleagues of IDH and our partners involved were used to develop the toolkit today that we launch. And with the guide, we really hope to inspire and also enable other people with an NGO background to step up into this role of a project organizer, an entity that can create and act on opportunities that attract private investment in support of sustainable land management. The toolkit reflects our lessons in originating those projects and bridging the gap between conservation and land management priorities and business and investment funds. We warmly hope that it will lead to more individuals and organizations picking up this role of a project organizer, and with that, to more money finding its path to positive impact on nature and sustainable landscapes. If out of the webinar today or from reading the toolkit you have any questions or suggestions, we much look forward to hearing from you. Then maybe finally, to close off, a short word of thanks to our colleagues and partners who've shared their insights, to WWF for the continued partnership and collaboration, to our speakers today, to Thomas Durland, moderator of the session, for his dedication on pulling together this piece of work, and for all of you, of course, for joining us today. And with that, handing back over to you, Thomas. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nienke, for those opening remarks. So giving the floor next to Charlotte to share a couple thoughts from her perspective.
Well, hi everyone, and thank you, Nienke. Actually, I'm very excited to meet everybody online today at the official launch of this guide. We believe in particular that the launch of this guide can provide guidance and a framework for designing landscape projects that consider also the needs of investors, especially when these projects are still in an early stage of development. A nice outcome for today would be if we start speaking the same language which also connects to the investors. The specific focus is how do we look at the landscape approach and how can we take this to the next level in terms of impact. I'm very happy that Stuart Beavis, the DFCD regional lead for Asia, will be presenting on behalf of WWF on how he is leading the work in Asia. And we are also very proud that Arif Rabiq is available today to share his insights on a very interesting project in Indonesia, PT in the Bamboo, a project which is partly supported by the DFCD. As mentioned, I'm the project manager for the DFCD at WWF. And for those who don't know the fund, the DFCD enables the private sector investments in projects with a positive impact on climate adaptation and mitigation in developing countries. The DFCD is managed by a consortium of 2 investors and also 2 NGOs. We believe in a unique proposition where we spend money and time to make more impact by supporting scalable and bankable projects, specific during the development phase, and give support to bankable projects towards investability. Actually, we have learned a lot the past 2 years, and today we would like to share our knowledge and experience with you, together with IDH, of course. Lastly, I want to thank IDH. WWF experienced our collaboration as a very pleasant one, and we see each other as complementary partners. Your hands-on mentality has really taken the guide to the next level. Thank you for that. And I would like to give the floor to Thomas.
Thanks, Charlotte, for those opening remarks. Yeah, thanks both Nienke and Charlotte for opening this webinar for all of us. So I think we're all very excited to hear more from our panelists, but I just wanted to share a few more insights on what this guide that we're launching today is actually about. And before going there, we would also like to get a bit of an idea of our audience that is joining us today. So I think my colleagues have posted the link in the chat that you can access to access this polling tool on Mentimeter. You can also scan the QR code if you happen to have your phone at hand to access directly. And we're just curious to understand a bit, what does our audience look like that we have online today, and what is the organization that you represent? So we can also have an idea of potentially your interest in this guide that we're launching today. So take a couple seconds just so that the responses can come in. I'm not sure, is this updating? Either no one is answering or we have an issue with this updating, which could be the case. I see. Okay, so I understand from our support here that unfortunately this is not updating right now. So we might come back to this later, but I suggest we move on. So sorry about that. Just a technical hiccup still after so many years of working with Zoom. I see. Now finally the responses are coming in. All right, so I see we have a lot of nonprofit representation on the line, which is good because it's also a core sort of target audience for which we wrote this guide. But also, yeah, we also hope that this guide will help connect perspectives from nonprofits closer to that of the private sector and of financial institutions, government, academia, others. So I see we have a few participants from other organizations that are nonprofit with us as well, but the majority representing nonprofit organizations. So yeah, really glad to have you with us here and to learn more about this toolkit. Great, so moving on, where can you find it? So it's online actually already. We'll share a link afterwards as well. You can find it on our websites. Or you can scan this QR code and download it directly. We will reshare this at the end of the webinar as well. And just to give you a bit of an idea of what's in it. So I think already touched upon in the opening remarks by Nienke and by Charlotte that there's this need of working on sustainable landscapes, and that's work that also organizations like IDH that I work for, but also WWF are highly involved in. I think everyone has seen the recent IPCC reports that have come out that also highlight once again, the importance of, for example, mitigating climate change, working on adaptation, and that this also requires significant financial means to transition these landscapes to more sustainable, resilient landscapes that also balance ecosystem integrity, benefits for people living in those landscapes and supporting their livelihoods, etc. And so we recognize that to enable this, there is also a need for private finance, and that is really what the toolkit focuses on, is on how can we further bridge that gap. So what it really does is it highlights several steps that can be taken from working in a landscape approach all the way to identifying and working with companies and project developers on projects that will eventually also meet the criteria of many of these impact investors that are out there. So we introduce those 4 stages that you see on screen, but we also recognize that there's of course not one size fits all solution. So it's really presented as a framework, a general framework that can be used and can be adapted into different contexts. And we also recognize that not all these stages are always as sequential as they are presented here, but hopefully they should provide a useful guidance for organizations and people working on developing projects that are bankable, but that also contribute to sustainable landscape goals. And another area that we highlight in this guide is the different roles that organizations can play in this project development. So I think Nienke already alluded to this role of a project organizer, which I think aligns very closely with what organizations such as IDH and WWF are working on. But at the same time, there's of course also the companies themselves or project developers, some might refer to, and then there's the investor, and then there's of course a wide range of other project stakeholders. So we try to also highlight, depending on what the background is of you as of the organization that you represent, what it is that your role could be in supporting this bankable project development in support of sustainable landscapes. I think another thing that we highlight, for example, is what are some typical characteristics of projects that are considered to be investable, and what should you maybe already think of in an early stage to make sure that those characteristics are met at the time when you start looking for private investment to further scale up the project. So I won't go into detail here, and maybe we'll hear a bit more about it from our panelists later, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a sneak peek of what you can find into the guide. So on that note, we just wanted to have one other quick poll, and then we move on to our panel, which is, we first ask what organization are you representing today, but we would also be keen to hear from you, what type of role do you see for yourself or the organization that you work for in sustainable landscape finance, or potentially, right, if that's something you aren't doing already. It seems there's a bit of delay again. All right, there's unfortunately a technical hiccup again, so let's just move on, but maybe we can come back to that later. Great, so moving on to our guest today. If the slide works, great. So first we'll hear from colleagues at WWF and IDH. So we have Stuart Beevers with us, who is the regional lead for Asia of the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And we also have Chi Tran with us, who is the Landscapes Asia Regional Director at IDH. So welcome, Stuart and Chi, and thank you for joining us today. So maybe just diving straight in, and in your response, you can reflect a bit on who you are and what you do at your organization. But maybe starting with you, Chi. At IDH, you have a role also in working on developing projects that become bankable and support a sustainable landscape, what the toolkit talks about. So in your experience, what have been some of the main challenges that you have come across when trying to look or support projects that bridge this gap between sustainable landscapes and investors?
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to be representative of the project organizer to build on this panel discussion. And I myself have to say also thank you WWF as well in joining with us on this effort in order to make this toolkit available for all of us for using today. And I myself, as the leader of the Asia landscapes with IDH, with the 7 landscapes in Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and India, I really see that during the discussion with the partners on finding the pipelines for the investable projects at the landscape level, there are a number of challenges that the Asian stakeholders are facing in order to provide such kind of bankable projects. And the first thing first is really the agricultural sector in almost of the landscapes in Asia produced by small-scale farmers. So the reason they are quite a small scale, from 1 to 2 hectares of each farm, and it is very hard to really find the business case for each individual farm, and it is also very hard to also find like the very efficient farmer aggregators in order to really create the business case at scale, so that we can receive the investment from the impact investors. The second challenge is that that it is very hard to really attract investment into the beyond farm level interventions by the companies. And this is really, you know, that the commodities companies and supply chain partners, they are really interested in investing in the on-farm management for the farmers, so that they can really create the sustainable products for their sourcing. However, the beyond farm activity is really creating the foundation for making that happen at the on-farm level, but it is very hard to attract investment into this beyond farm action. And the last but not least challenge that we are facing in Asia landscape is really that the existing credits or finance for smallholders now are not normally linked to the market demand. And that is really a gap there that we really need to fill out when we really support the smallholders, the farmers, to get access to finance, because otherwise it is very hard to really trigger the investment into the sustainable sourcing areas. They prefer to put it for the working capital, more for education of their children, more for other things. But for sustainable landscapes, it is very hard to make it happen at the larger scale if it is not linked with the market new requirements and market demand. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chi. And I think those are some really interesting challenges. I'd love to hear in a bit how you're maybe working also to address some of these. But yeah, moving first to Stuart, it would be good to hear from you, Stuart. Well, first of all, if you recognize maybe some of the challenges that Chi has highlighted, or maybe you've come across other ones in your work, but then also to hear how at DFCD or the WWF, what it is that your role is, and how are you addressing some of the key challenges that you come across in your work.
Yeah, hi, thank you. My name is Stuart Beavis. I work out of WWF Hong Kong. I'm the regional lead for the DFCD in Asia. I spent 25 years in investment banking, which is partly the skill set you need for this. Challenges, yeah, there's a lot. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And to be honest, a lot of the ideas that we just heard, I totally agree with. I think one of the biggest challenges is financing and capacity. I think that all NGOs need more financing. They all need more capacity. I think that we live in a world where the financial sector have jumped on the green bandwagon, and they are telling the world they have $100 billion to invest. And I've even heard a couple of times $1 trillion to invest. But at every stage, they want to invest in mature projects. At every stage, they want to invest in something that is completely and utterly business ready and all the development's been done. So quite what they're doing with their $1 trillion, I'm not quite sure. The thing here is, the challenge is to get the money, the finances to be used for technical assistance and development work, because there are projects out there. There are projects that need help, but we just need to be able to move the money. And conservation needs to find a way to attract more money. It's as simple as that. We need to mobilize this private capital, and that's very, very important. The other challenge, I think, for a number of people working with NGOs is literally private sector engagement. A number of people are experts in conservation, but experts in climate change. They're not experts in dealing with and talking with the private sector. And I think that's something that all NGOs can improve on. And the other thing I'd point out is education. Education is vital. A lot of people, say they understand bankable projects. They talk about blended finance as if they're a world leader in it. And then they literally talk in such complicated ways that people don't understand it. A lot of it is actually generally quite simple. And a lot of the time it is simple debt, it is simple equity. And I think people need to understand that. But yeah, the challenges are quite vast, but I think within the DFCD, we are certainly put together the right people with the right backgrounds working together. And it is a mixture of conservation and it is a mixture of finance, and you can get things done.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Maybe Chi, if you want to respond to that, or maybe does that resonate with you, and how would it link, for example, to the work that you're doing at IDH?
Yes, thank you, Stuart and Thomas, for your some of your suggestion, which is very relevant for us as well when working with the partners in finding the bankable and investable projects. And you are right that education is quite important on financing for the credit takers, but also for the smallholders. In the case that we are now working in the landscapes, and we see that education, capacity building for them are quite important. But on the other hand, with IDH, we also thinking that, wow, then the service delivery for the smallholders, including the financing services, is quite important for them. And once we improve their capacity, and then we also providing access to services of input services of technical assistance and services of finance, then it is also a good way in order to really create the adoption rates higher and at a larger scale. So therefore, I think that in IDH, we combine the education capacity building into one package of service delivery models that provided for the smallholders, but also the partners along the value chain of the communities in the landscape area, so that we can really creating the package for them of not only knowledge sharing, but also tell them how to do that, and then mentoring along with them on implementing and piloting these service delivery models.
Great. Well, thanks, G. And so we're always a bit short on time. So maybe I'll just ask one more question to both of you, and maybe you can just point out one example very briefly, and then we'll have to move on to our other panelists. But maybe just looking at the projects that either at IDH or at WWF/DFCD you've worked with that have been successful in finding that sweet spot of creating sustainable landscape impact, but also being bankable. What is an example of a key success factor of such project that is bankable?
Well, to me, bankable is 4 simple things. Firstly, you have to have conservation impact. You have to have, from a DFCD perspective, climate impact. And I would suggest DFCD, and particularly WWF, we have some people who are experts at this. Secondly, it has to be profitable. And this is where people have to understand that a bankable project is a business. And at every stage, we have to make a sustainable profitability that we can model. And we understand the risks of that model, and we understand the risks that will affect a business. Next is the private sector. And I think, when picking a private sector partner, and this is a key way we look at it. We're not a bank lending you money to go and buy a car. All they care about is getting their money back. What we are looking for is a long-term private sector partner. So when you speak to Arif later, he is a perfect example of someone that we want to deal with. Exceptionally knowledgeable what he does. He's very well connected, knows his business, and will work alongside WWF and FMO for a number of years. So think partnership, don't just think client, someone borrowing money. And the next thing is scalability. And there are a lot of really, really good ideas out there. Unfortunately, they're just not scalable. And if you add the scalability, and this is where dealing with the private sector is vitally important, because they can take the debt to scale projects. They can take an equity injection to scale things. And once you scale things, the conservation and the climate change impact increases enormously. You can start off by doing 100 acres, all of a sudden you're doing 10,000. The impact is there. And that is the important thing, about too many projects will fall down with lack of scalability. They might work very, very well, and they might be excellent for another form of financing. Okay, so think impact, think profitability, think the quality of the private sector partner, and the knowledge, and think the scalability, and you've got half a chance of putting a bankable project together.
Great, thanks, Stuart. I think that resonates a lot with our experience as well. Do you want anything to add to that, Chi?
Yes, I wonder if I can take 2 examples, but I know the time is not allowed. So so I will just only quickly mentioning these 2 initiatives, but in a very short time. So the first example, also I think that also resonate what just mentioned on the principles of how to have a good like a investable and bankable projects. That is the deal that we just closed with Ecom. Ecom is a very big coffee and commodities traders in the world, with the FarmFit fund, which managed by IDH there as well. And in this deal, this is really that Ecom attract the investment from the FarmFit fund along with their own fund in order to provide a package of credit to be provided to the smallholders. But of course, and I think that is also relating to the question that Anya put in the chat box, is that of course Ecom cannot provide finance directly to the smallholders, right? Because they are very small in terms of scale. So the way that Ecom is doing is that they also go through the farmer aggregators. So the farmer aggregators here means the farmer organizations under the different certification schemes. It can also be like cooperatives. Here in this case, Ecom proposed a number of cooperatives that were already there, and then they can inject the funding into those cooperatives. And also the middlemen, who are also quite important in providing input services and financing services for those farmers. So that is a very typical way of how we can really bring the impact fund in order to support for the smallholders, to support for the sustainable landscape vision that we work together there. And however, there is also one more thing that I totally agree with you, Stuart, that the private sector interest is quite important. But on the other hand, our experiences also show that the public sector enabling environment and also co-funding from private sector, public sector is also quite important in this sense. So therefore, in one of our landscape, we bring the public sector along with the local bank in order to set up what does it mean by like the local landscape fund. And that local landscape fund will provide the smallholders and the farmers aggregators like a middleman or cooperatives the access to finance, so that they can both do forest protection, but on the other hand, to provide livelihoods for the farmers there in that one. So that is really the place that the public and the private sector really work together to coordinate and create that landscape fund for both protection and inclusion and production part that link directly with the supply chain of the landscapes there. So I stop here, but I think that this is a quite interesting discussion, and we look forward to discussing with you further if time's allowed. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chi, and also thank you, Stuart. Indeed, we were a bit short on time, which is a pity because I think we could have continued this interesting discussion for a while. But I also really want to move to our next 2 speakers, Arif and Richard. So I'll just quickly pull up the slides again, so they can use that in their introductions. Let's see. Great. So like I said, we have Richard and Arif here working for Cinch Markets and Indo-Bamboo respectively. So we now can really hear more from the business perspective. When we talk about topics such as bankability and sustainable landscape, but how does it really work from an actual business perspective? So I would just like to invite each of them one by one to give a short introduction of who they are and the company that they work with. And then after, I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. But maybe starting with Richard Catois from Cinch Markets. The floor is yours. I'll put up your slide.
No worries, thank you. So Cinch is basically a land management company that aggregates underperforming or non-performing smallholder land into larger commercial mosaic operations. So you can see our pilot farm here on the slide. It looks like a heat map. There's non-contiguous land all brought together into one larger entity that we manage completely end to end from the day we sign up somebody all the way to when our product reaches the buyer. the net result of our intervention in our business is small landowners or the users of Cinch receive about 3 times more money per annum through a guaranteed monthly income, which is pretty transformational for this group of people that we work with. And also Cinch basically represents a mechanism for those for smallholders to basically unlock value in what is normally their only asset, which is a piece of land. So that's kind of, I know we're short on time, that's kind of what we do, and happy to answer any more questions as we go. And thanks for having me.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Richard. That was, I'm sure there will be more questions about it later, so hopefully we can get to some of them. But thanks a lot for your introduction. So just moving on to Arif, and then we get to some questions. So I have 2 slides here from you, Arif, so just let me know when you want me to flip them, and then the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So my name is Arif, and I'm from Indonesia and PT Indo Bambu Lestari. Thank you for the very nice introduction, Stuart. We basically create bamboo laminates with communities, and we do what we call a people first, people public private partnership. And that means really working with communities with existing bamboo resource areas around them, and also with the 88 million hectares of degraded land around Indonesia. Actually, very near to most of these communities are huge tracts of degraded land that we help them to restore. And we really kind of look at this concept of tenure and try to flip, the concept of tenure to create this ownership solution between the generations within these communities to have pride to manage agro ecosystems and create, from bamboo, from plus or minus 2,000 hectares of land, 70,000 clumps of bamboo, and more than 50% are women. Next slide, please. Up to 70% of the active people managing our systems are women, and they can create more than $1 million of revenues from this partnership system. And there's a lot of key steps that we've learned since 2012, and a lot of key learnings of how to give that access of tenure in the right way, how to build the capacity, how to create these village level institutions, how to get that access to finance and an ecosystem of businesses, of private sectors to support that finance, and of course, access to markets. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Arif, for that introduction. And thanks again, both Richard and Arif, for joining us today. So I have a couple of questions here, and I think, we'll be interested to hear answers from both of you. So I'll just ask the question, and then maybe starting with Richard and following by Arif to hear from your respective experiences, how you look at this. So I think each of you already in your introduction explained a bit how your business model kind of works, right? And how it interacts, how it both makes kind of business sense, but also has this local and sustainable landscapes impact, if you will. So I was just curious to know if you can expand on that a little bit more, and how in your experiences, what are some of these key success factors in making what you do work from a business perspective, but still being able to create that positive impact on the landscape or on the environment, the communities that you work with? What are some of the key success factors that you have seen in further developing the companies or the businesses that you represent? Maybe Richard.
Sure. So I think the most important thing for us is that impact, however you define that, is a function of our success. It's not the reason that we're there or why the company was started. Ultimately, we started Cinch because one, we wanted to have an impact in the world, but number two, we were solving a problem around basically the poverty trap that is smallholder farming globally, and trying to find a way to fix that. We didn't start in trying to make incomes 3 times better, right? That wasn't where we started. So I think it's really important that impact, however you define it, is a function of your success and of your scale. It's not, kind of where the business is drawn out of, because ultimately what you're going to do is you're going to make decisions that are not economical, which means that they're not going to be scalable. And to Stuart's point, obviously that's a huge problem with a lot of these projects. So, I think we were relatively lucky in that we're taking an existing business model and, received the IDHTA facility to effectively adapt our existing model, which exists currently in high value horticulture and in broadacre crops, and move that into forestry and in acres that have, or in areas that have experienced desertification. So it's a little bit different, like we're using an existing business model, but ultimately, I think that's the most important thing when we think about having a scalable social impact business is it needs to, focus on the problem you're solving first, and then the outcome of that is a substantial impact in the world.
Great, thanks, Richard. Yeah, so maybe just moving on directly to you, Arif, maybe you recognize some of that, or you have a different perspective, but yeah, keen to hear your experience on this topic.
Thomas. So, I mean, like Richard, we also learned and were very much influenced by our friends in China, Chinese Academy of Forestry, who really helped to create the bamboo sector in China and created this value addition at the village level solution where, industry was really pushed very hard to purchase a value add product from the communities. And I think that's a really key enabler to this whole system, because it builds trust. And I think building and sustaining trust is so important between people, public and private partners, and the farmers, if they were in the room today, they'd be they're the most trustworthy people in the room, but they're also the most conservative. They like their ABCs, they like that routine, and they're more, how do you say, they have more inertia, they have more fear of failure and change. And so, again, going back to kind of how do you create that ecosystem of businesses that really work together to finance, to support, to keep the capacity going at the from our side, from a clump of bamboo, keeping a clump of bamboo healthy, getting a pole, and then converting that pole, all the way from a strip into a chopping board, for example. And there's a lot of work there of sustaining that alignment.
Great, thanks, Harry. Maybe just building on both of your answers, but I think what Stuart also mentioned, right, in the previous part of the panel, is that often many of these impact investors that are out there, they look for projects that are already at a certain level of what we call bankability or have a certain maturity level. But perhaps what is sometimes overlooked is sort of all the effort that gets put into getting to that stage, right? So in your experience, either at Cinch Markets or at Indo-Bamboo, could you give us some examples of like major challenges that you've come across in getting to the point where you're currently at with your company, and what have been some of the ways that you were able to overcome those? Maybe feel free to start with any, but otherwise maybe Richard first and then Arif second again.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately you need to start with a sound business case that is scalable ultimately, right? I mean, sustainability is part of what we're talking about here. There's also the sustainability of a business, right? If it fails after 2 years, there's a lot of money, a lot of effort that has gone into something that has then failed, which isn't necessarily a problem because people should try, but ultimately it needs to have a return on investment. Obviously impact investors or governments are slightly different, but at the end of the day, they are looking for businesses to continue And I think for us, the most important thing when looking, I mean, like specifically what we're doing right now is basically adapting our existing business into forestry. There are so many different ways you can go about it, right? Like there are so many different rabbit holes you can go down. There's hundreds of thousands of different ways we could look at what we're doing from an agronomy perspective, from a development perspective, from a scalability perspective. But I think ultimately you need to be very strict about how you put resources to those various opportunities, because obviously capital is finite, but also is time. So I think the biggest thing for us is there's so many different opportunities, but you really need to put money or time into ones that you think are going to be most successful. And ultimately, I mean, I go back to what Stuart said, like ultimately that is a scalable, profitable model. And so not compromising on certain things in your business because there's a really great opportunity to, do something. You need to really make sure that there really is no compromise, because ultimately there are opportunities that will fit your business model, but there are about 5,000 different business models that can fit a certain crop or thing that you're trying to do. So from our perspective, we always look from the top down, basically, and start with the business model and then go down. And that's been so helpful to us as we've looked at various opportunities across the space.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd just echo a few of those points as well. I mean, it took us in the current landscapes that we're in East Nusa Tenggara, which is part of the east side of Indonesia, and the Wallacea ecoregion, drier part of Indonesia. Things grow a little slower. It took us about 10 years of failing with different communities in different ways when we were really trying to build the whole capacity story in one nice package before we moved forward. And I think what we realized, after many times getting slapped in the face, basically, that it's learning by doing, and you do a little bit of a capacity build, and then you move and you make some money and you get business going, and figuring out that way to keep the momentum, keep the trust, keep the alignment with the communities, so that they truly believe and have that consensus, I think has been a big learning from our side. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Arif. So then I'd just like to connect a bit our two sort of different panels, and maybe also turn back a bit to Chi and Stuart. So a question that I would have is, having heard also a bit about the experiences that Richard and Arif shared about Cinch Markets and Indo-Bamboo, where do you, and you touched upon this already a bit in the previous questions, but maybe you can expand a little bit more on where you then would see a role for organizations like IDH and WWF in working with companies like Cinch Markets and Indo-Bamboo. Maybe starting with you, Chi, and then Stuart.
Yes, thank you very much.
It's a bit difficult, but we can hear you. Maybe try again.
Yeah, is it better now?
Yes, it's much better. Yeah.
Yes, no, I totally agree with the learnings that shared by the two of you in this, and I think that is really why we really need the neutral convener like IDH in this sense, and other NGO organizations as well, to really bring the different private sector together. And what we really want to see here is not only the companies at the downstream level, but it is also the companies along the value chain who will also have the responsibility to support for the companies at the downstream level to meet their own commitment of sustainability in the long run as well. So and then before going to the smallholders and the farmer organizations there. So therefore I think that that this is a long way process for the sustainable landscape financing. because it needs to be like aligned among the different partners within the supply chains and also across sectors as well. So that is also what I also want to see. This is not only the case of bamboo, for example, not only the case of palm oil, but also other crops that is also now providing livelihoods for the farmers in that areas, for example, cocoa, coffee, and agroforestry system, for example, where timber is also quite important there. So we really need to provide like the business cases for the farmers based on this intercropping and the agroforestry system in order to really having the business case that is just not only one commodities. And that is where we really had to bring the other suppliers and the commodities companies in this picture, in order for not only one commodities companies, but also the other commodities companies also involved in supporting the farmers in this sense. And so that's why we say that the landscape financing is more complicated and it takes more time. But once it is settled, then it can create like a very big, larger scale impacts and sustainable impacts for the farmers. Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe over to you, Stuart.
I think the big thing how I look at all this is, we're genuinely trying to connect conservation and investment finance. And, the key job that Charlotte, who's here, have is literally building those bridges. And they're not easily built, to be quite honest. I think one of the things that we've done is that we know we have conservation experts within WWF. I mean, people who know more about trees and animals than I'll ever know. And that's great, and we can lean on them. The other thing is where I look at it is, working with people like FMO and CFM, and let's just take FMO, who are the lead of the consortium. The senior guys like Art Mulder have been doing, conservation finance for 18, 20 years. So when we bring a concept like Arif's PT and in their bamboo, I'm not saying they've seen that before, but they've seen concepts which they've worked with in a similar way. Okay, and what is very good to help, making something sustainable, making something work. And we want something to work, not just for, a few months. We're talking 10, 20, 30 years here, and the rest, where it is sustainable. These people are experts. They're absolutely experts. And because they're experts, you listen and you learn from them. And then when you take the way that the FMO work is, a lot of Asia, there are no loans. There's no loans not only to, the smallholder farmer, but there's no loans to the private sector in some of these countries. So we are looking at expansion loans, and if you just go along for a conservation or a climate change loan, you're not getting it. But if you add on top of that, working with WWF, you're looking at environmental safeguard ideas, all of a sudden you really are getting the full package. You're getting a package of people who are actually multiple talented in multiple ways, helping you build a business that is going to be sustainable. And as I go back to the comment before, if it's sustainable and we can scale this, we're doing a lot more climate change work. So it's a multifaceted approach that we have, and we are bringing in people into the team that have various skill sets. And one of the things is we're all learning off each other. And what I do think is happening is that every private sector partner we've got in some way is learning off, the DFCD on how to actually approach what they're doing and make their actual business. And always remember, it's a business. It's not just a grant work that does save some trees. We are generally building a sustainable business and making a sustainable business actually better for the long term.
Great. I think that's an excellent wrap up. We're also nearing the end, unfortunately, but I think what I would still like to do, I'm going to ask my colleague Jenya, who has been sort of analyzing all the different comments and questions that came in through the chat. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to look at them myself yet, but maybe, and this is going to be a challenge, I know, but maybe there's one question that you can pick out, or a question that combines perhaps different sentiments of things that people want to know, that we can post to our panelists sort of to share their final reflections, and also then a couple of closing remarks. So is there any sort of burning questions that you've come across, Jenya, or something that we can
I think there's one that sort of addresses the type of investment projects that we have seen, and a question to the panelists, if you guys could share some examples of ecosystem services that could be brought into the projects where sustainable commodities are involved, but also wild landscapes.
Great. So anyone from our 4 panelists that would like to respond first? Maybe from Cinch Markets in Bamboo, good to hear a bit on sort of how, also ecosystem impact is integrated in your business, but then also good to hear from Stuart and Chi from the IDH and WWF perspective.
I'll just sneak my comment.
Yeah, please go ahead, Arif. Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, from our side, we talk about, and thank you, Chief, for bringing that up, you know, this bamboo-based agroforestry, where we talk about the bamboo as a medium root, you know, palms and cacao and coffee as a medium root, and then deep root and taproot species all being together in one knitted hydrology, where we're creating a water reservoir, you know, below the soil that is you know, restoring degraded lands. And so, you know, I think water is such an important ecosystem service that needs to be respected just as much as carbon in the future, if not more. You know, and also UNCCD, you know, land restoration. This is something that I think is amazing with so many of the projects that we're all doing, and also biodiversity. You know, we've learned so much of the different species of flora that can be integrated to just create amazing, high productive, low input systems. So humans still have a lot to learn about agro ecosystems and productive forest ecosystems. And I think payment for ecosystems are so important. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Aid. I think that's an excellent sort of example of the type of characteristics that we really try to combine, right? So looking at leveraging ecosystem services to create positive impact and also connected to the business that you're working on. So thanks for sharing that. So yeah, maybe just to close off, I would like to invite each of the panelists just to share a couple of final remarks or anything that you would like to voice before we formally close off. So maybe starting with you, Richard.
Yeah, sure. Well, no, thank you all very much. And, you know, we are very thankful for IDH partnering with us and believing in what we're trying to do. And ultimately, we're trying to find a solution to, you know, solve a really, really big problem with land degradation, and doing that in a way that's truly sustainable, you know, with a profitable business behind it and improving the lives of the communities in which we operate. So thanks a lot, and look forward to more of these in the future, and speaking to you guys soon.
Great. Ari?
Yeah, also thank you very much, everyone, for having me. I think from our side, you know, this thing of partnerships and adding the people to public-private partnerships is a really big passion of ours, and really looking at how we start with the condition, the true condition of these communities, and responding accordingly. And, you know, as Stuart was speaking to, taking the appropriate time to prepare these villages, these communities to be bankable. You know, we need that partnership, and may we all do it together. Thank you.
Stuart?
A couple of things, really. I think, remember, it's not a problem of there being enough money. As I said earlier, you know, some of these banks are out there saying they've got $1 trillion to spend on, you know, conservation and green things. But it is a problem of there just not being enough, large enough investable projects for the financial sector to invest in. I think, you know, not just the DFCD, but others need to be building, you know, building a pipeline, And that is something that we have to do, and we have to continue to do. I think it's very, very important. And always remember, bankable does mean investable. People are going to invest in these things. They're either going to take debt and invest in it, or they're going to take an equity, someone's going to take an equity stake. And every business, every project is a business. And that is super, super key. And people have to understand it is about price and who buys it and where the market is, as much as it is always about conservation and biodiversity and climate change, because it is as important at the end. Otherwise, it just will not be sustainable. But the big takeaway for me from working in owning this industry for a couple of years is that conservation, and not just bankable projects, needs to find a way to attract more money. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. And then finally, Chi.
Yes, I think that I will echo what the other three speakers and also the two opening remark ladies already stressed out right from the beginning. And I think that for me, the landscape financing needs time. We cannot be rushed like from the beginning. Like, let's say that we find a good project from the beginning, but it is very hard to make it scalable. So therefore, I think that the process is like a setting up, piloting it, finding the business case, and until the business case is at scale, then we should bring like the investors to come as the impact investors, and where we can really create the enabling environment there for the investors, but also for the credit takers, in order to really ensure that the risks minimized for them as well. And also one thing that for landscape finance that I should also take it as the note is here is that we rather brings the different projects in one landscape in order to link them all together and to deliver the vision and the goal has set by the public and the private sectors in that vision, and connecting those dots in order to support those delivery, rather than finding the different projects in the different small scale area. And that is very hard to make it scalable. So, and I fully agree with Stu, what you mentioned quite many times, scalability. And where we can make it scalable is where we really have the enabling environment and the risk management for that landscape is happening. So thanks a lot, WWF and IDH financing team that have invited me to this session, and I'm happy to follow up with any of the next questions and discussions of that. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Chi, and thanks to everyone for our entire panel. So Richard and Arif and Stuart for joining us. We went a few minutes over time, so thank you so much for everyone for staying with us just a little bit longer. The toolkit that we have launched today is online as we speak. You can download it from our website. We'll also be sharing it on social media. We will also be sharing a short report afterwards. We'll try to get back to as many of the questions that we didn't get to in this webinar later. So please stay with us. And if there's any questions or you would like to get in touch, please do. We would love to hear from you. Continue engaging with everyone on this really important topic. So on that note, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for your time. And we really hope this guide will be of use to you, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.